Greetings, fellow conquerors. This is darkfireslide, and welcome to another episode of The Great Ideas here in EU4. Today we're going to be talking about economic ideas, one of the admin idea groups, and really just go into how I feel about it, when you should take it, and if it's any good. So let's go ahead and take a look at economic ideas. Alright, so first we're going to start off with the actual ideas of the group. First we have bureaucracy, which is a national tax modifier bonus of 10%. Now, the thing I find with economic ideas is that the more money you have, the better these ideas are, which sounds like obvious, but because of how costs work in EU4, if you're making 20 ducats a month, this is going to be from tax, I should say. This is going to give you 2 more ducats a month. Now, what can you do with 2 more ducats a month, you might ask? So if we look here, a infantry unit is going to be 0.26 per month before reductions. I don't have any reductions on this file. So just base infantry price, 2 ducats a month is 8 regiments of infantry, which is quite a lot. That's a substantial number of units. Likewise for cavalry, that's going to be 3 units of cavalry, and for artillery, that's going to be only 2 more per month, almost 3. So that money is really going to help you support more units, and as we'll see later on in this group, pretty much all of those kinds of ideas help you. And of course, the more money you make, the more effective this actually is, and the more modifiers you have, the more effective this 10% actually becomes, because of the sheer amount of stuff that you can either support in terms of troops, or buy in terms of buildings or ships for that matter. So that's just kind of a general concept on money itself. So then we go on to organized construction, which reduces building costs by 10%. This is pretty substantial, given that the new building system in EU4. Well, I call it new. It's years old now, but we're seeing reductions of, at the very beginning, about 10 ducats from a building, whereas the later buildings, so you're going to save about 50 ducats on manufactories, which is pretty substantial, and 30 ducats on some of the advanced buildings, or even more on some of these forts, for example, just in terms of raw costs. If you have a national idea that gives a bonus to building cost reduction, and you take this, your buildings are just going to be super cheap, and you'll be raking in absurd amounts of money just from your province modifiers. Very, very useful for playing tall. Still pretty useful for playing wide as well, blobbing out basically. Next we get National Bank, and this is yearly inflation reduction plus 0.1. This is useful for pretty much everybody, because if, like, for example, as Kilwa, I have multiple gold mines. As we can see from my income chart here, I make 17 ducats a month from gold, which is quite a lot, and it's causing my inflation to go up rather rapidly right now, 0.07. Earlier in the campaign, it was going up as much as 0.017, or 0.17 per month, or sorry, per year. And having that reduction means that you're going to be able to run gold mines. It also means that taking out loans is a lot less risky, because that inflation reduction makes the impact of loans less bad. So if you want to ease yourself into learning how to use loans in EU4, taking economic ideas is not a bad place to start, because it basically forgives you for taking them if you need them. Next we have debt and loans, which is interest per annum -1. What this means is that the average loan percentage, the amount of extra interest that you have to pay back when you take off a loan, is lowered by 1%. And interestingly, the Catholic religion has a bonus you can get that lowers this by -1 as well. So you can get loans with fairly cheap payback rates. I think the base is 4%. I could be mistaken on that. And I think it may also depend on the actual like the length of the loan, which is something you can only choose if you take economic ideas. If you take economic ideas, you get an event to reform your national bank, and you can actually choose the length and amount of loans. So that's just something to think about. Is this allows you to take out loans more comfortably, basically. Which I know some people are like, oh, I never take out loans, but sometimes you do. Sometimes we all have to take out loans, whether or not we want to admit it. If you don't, well, I applaud you, but I usually take out loans, and I think a lot of other people do too. So next we have centralization, which is monthly autonomy change to minus 0.05. In addition to making your new provinces pay you more faster, the other thing that this does is that while you're at war, it still means that your autonomy is going to continue ticking down. And when you have something like an administrative monarchy or other governments that have monthly autonomy change, this means that your provinces are very, very rapidly going to start getting taxed. And so when you conquer and when you have this idea, it makes new provinces much, much more efficient, more quickly. So it's a very, very powerful idea, in my opinion. Next, we have nationalistic enthusiasm, which lowers land maintenance modifier by 10%. As we can see here on the infantry, that would be a reduction of about 0.02, so it would go down to 0.24 per month. However, it's important to note that you can get these modifiers to stack with things like quantity ideas. And so, taking all these bonuses means that you can have very, very cheap troops indeed. And some nations even have modifiers to help with this as well in their national ideas. Although I actually can't think of one off the top of my head that does have land maintenance, so I could be mistaken on that. Again, sounding very unprofessional, but anyway, very, very, very useful, especially for the more expensive regiments like artillery, and it also really helps with mercenaries as well, although it's not as powerful as the mercenary maintenance for mercenaries. So, moving on, we now get to Smithian economics. And this increases your production efficiency by 10%. Same argument for national tax modifier. The important thing to note with production efficiency, though, is that it doesn't improve your trade value. Normally, like for example, when you build a manufactory, it increases the actual amount of goods being produced in that province, which means that it adds more value to the actual trade node. Production efficiency does not add more to the trade node, it only improves the amount of money you gather from the goods you're already producing. So this is a useful bonus, just understand what it actually does. Right now we can see, for example, that I'm actually making more money from production and trade because I'm at the point in the game where that makes sense. And so a 10% bonus to production would actually be quite substantial, somewhere on the order of 2 or 3 ducats a month, which, as we discussed, is quite a few troops indeed. And finally, when you finish economic ideas, you're going to get development costs minus 20%. This is extremely useful for nations outside of Europe because you have to develop your provinces to unlock institutions. And since you need a crap load of money to unlock institutions in the first place, this is really going to help you in that regard. Otherwise, this is useful for any nation just trying to play tall and develop their provinces rather than trying to blob and go wide. But anyway, let's go ahead and start talking about economic policies, and there are actually quite a few good ones in here. So first we're going to start with quality, which is the weapon quality standards policy, which costs admin points, very interestingly, and it gives a discipline bonus of 5%, which is quite good, since 5% discipline is basically the highest bonus you can get from discipline now. Any extra source of it is good. Discipline, of course, reduces incoming damage by the amount that it states, more or less, and increases the amount of damage you deal by that amount, more or less. Next, we have for trade. If you happen to take trade, if you really just need money and you took trade and economic, you get the Statute of Monopolies, which gives a plus 10% to trade and production efficiency and costs Diplo points for per month. I can't stress how good of a policy this is, especially if you have a good trade node and you have good production. So if you're like Britain, for example, this policy is absolutely disgusting. Because if you think about it, it's like a 20% income for 1 Diplo point per month is just, to me, is extremely powerful. Now, on top of that, we have the Stamp Act with exploration ideas, which gives global tariffs plus 25%, which is, if you have a lot of colonies, quite a substantial amount, because the amount of tariffs that you have on your colonies from ideas doesn't affect them the way that actually manually raising the tariffs does. So having these bonuses is quite powerful. It does, however, cost admin points per month, but it could be a lot of money depending on where your colonies are and how much money they're making. So next we go to defensive ideas, which gives us the Public Welfare Act. This one's okay. It gives -1 unrest and -10% stability cost. My only problem with it is that it costs admin points and not military. Though some people would argue that military points are more important than admin. I personally argue that admin points are more important just because of the way that I play, which is more of a wide, blobby sort of way. And so this is okay. The -1 unrest is the main thing because unrest reduction is always a good thing. Um, and next we move on to diplomatic ideas, which is the Dissolution Act. This gives a plus 10% to your tax modifier and minus 0.05 monthly autonomy for diplo points. It's so good because this gives you a ton of money and it stacks with the bonus that you already get from economic ideas. And right now, for example, I'm Kilwa and I have an administrative monarchy, and that means that if I had that policy plus economic ideas, I would be at minus 0.15 autonomy a month or a year. No, it is a month. So that's just absurd. That's just really really good. Provinces that you just conquered will be like fully autonomous in like 10, 20 years at that rate, which is just absurd. Um, or probably closer to 30 or 40 years to be fair. But again, it costs Diplo points, so to me that's just really really strong. Next we combine with offensive, which gives the horse artillery policy. And this one is super good. It used to be artillery combat ability plus 20%. Now it's only 10%. However, for military points, it's really, really strong because, especially in the late game, artillery dominates combat. So having them do more damage is just great. Next, we get on to plutocratic ideas. This one's not crazy, but it is good. This is national tax modifier plus 10% for formalized scales, weights, and measures. It costs admin points per month, like you might expect. And it's just a tax modifier. Very useful in the early game when taxes are more important, or if you're just a big nation and you need money. And lastly, we'll go ahead and discuss quantity as well, which is agricultural cultivation. This gives development costs minus 10%, which stacks with economic for a 30% bonus, or reduction, I should say, and land force limit modifier plus 10%. So if you need those extra troops, which you can afford because you have economic ideas, this will give you a nice bonus. And note the tone that I'm saying all these with. I think that this is like, in case it's not apparent, these are all very very solid because money is almost always useful. Some people will argue, and I know Aruma, for example, and I hate to name drop because name dropping, but he has said many times, monarch points are more important than money most of the time. While I do disagree somewhat with that statement, it's also important to note that without money, you can't have an army and can't build buildings to make more money to build more armies or build ships. So having all these bonuses just is very, very helpful. And the other thing about economic ideas, and this is getting a little bit into the conclusion, is that they're very universal, and I'll kind of discuss that later. I'll just kind of tease at it now. But right now, we're going to go ahead and go to the economic events. All right, economic idea events are all right. They range from neutral to okay, to somewhat good. And we'll start with this is a two-sided event. There's production improvements and production stifled, which is a either plus or minus 10% production efficiency modifier for 10 years. And the improvements only happen after you get Smithian economics, which is the last idea in the group that gives that production efficiency bonus. Next, we have the successful bureaucracy event. For 10 years, you gain 10% national tax modifier and minus 0.1 yearly corruption, which is a -1 total because it's over 10 years. So that's okay. But the tax modifier is nice. There is and the weird thing is there are two more identical events with the same name as this. So there's another successful bureaucracy event, which gives, let's see, if you have at least one corruption, you lose one, and if not, you gain 100 admin power. So that's pretty good if you have no corruption. And there's another identical event, but this one, you have to have at least 15 provinces, and you get to choose between paying half your annual income to gain 50 admin power, or else you lose 10 admin power. So kind of a weird choice on that one, but it's pretty good to, pay money to get admin power, which is, it's just good. Then there's the corrupt bureaucracy event, which gives plus 0.1 yearly corruption for 10 years. So it's just basically a +1 to corruption over 10 years, which sucks. But it's pretty easy to counteract with your slider, so not a big deal there, to be honest. Next, we get National Bank pays dividends. You gain 1/4 of your annual income just as money, so that's nice. However, then there's also the counterpart of that event, the National Bank in Trouble event, which you choose between paying one sum of your annual income or you gain 3 inflation. So Not really kind of a crappy event there, but considering you can get free money from this idea group, it's pretty good. Next, we have local tax increase, which gives a province +1 base tax. This bonus and any event that improves base modifiers for provinces do not count towards institutions. Um, then there's the more local recruiting event, which is the same as the local tax increase, except it's manpower instead of uh, base tax. And lastly, there's just an event called stability increase, which gives you +1 stability, but if you're already at 3 stability, it gives you 50 admin power instead. But with those out of the way, oh, actually there is a big one I'm forgetting. There's an event that happens if you take economic ideas called something like the national bank reform or something like that. And basically what this allows you to do is choose the length of your loans. So what it does is it lets you choose between having a half year interval for your loans. So your loans are 1/2 of your yearly income. It allows you to stay on the normal, which is your yearly income, and then it also allows you to choose a 2-year income for your loans. And so basically, this just gives you the ability to customize how much you want your loans to be. If you hate having big loans that take forever to pay off, you can instead vouch for the smaller loans that are only a half-year income. Or if you don't care about that at all, you can just take the normal 12-month loan. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the conclusion, how I feel about this group. Alright, so the thing about economic ideas is that it always used to be a good idea group. However, when institutions were introduced into the game, it instead became one of the best admin groups in the game. More money is always a good thing. More money is more troops. More money is more buildings that make more money. More money is a navy. More money is just, anything you can conceivably think of that doesn't cost monarch points usually costs money. You can use money to send gifts to people to improve relations. You can, just all sorts of different things that you can do with money. You can support more colonies if you have enough money. Um, and so as a result, economic ideas is typically a great idea group to take as pretty much any nation, because every nation will rely on tax income, and that helps that. And it also improves production efficiency, which pretty much every nation can use by the end of the game. Unlike trade ideas, you don't need to be in a good trade node to make use of economic ideas. Pretty much everyone can make good use of economic ideas. And so that to me makes it one of the best idea groups in the game for that reason. Um, this makes it so that nations outside of Europe can much more effectively keep up to date with institutions, just because they can improve their provinces pretty quickly with that -20% modifier. And especially if you have a university and you build and if you're on like grasslands and you have that 20% modifier from economic, you can just get some ridiculously cheap development and really catch up on institutions really easily, as long as you have like a grassland somewhere that you can just kind of make your capital, so to speak. But yeah, it's just a very very good idea group that works with almost every nation, because when don't you need more money? You can support more forts with more money. The possibilities are just endless, and the fact that the group just gives you more money with its events too is insane. And there's even a positive stability event and not a negative stability event in this group, which is pretty awesome actually, not having to worry about getting a stability hit from taking an idea group. So, and of course the policies are pretty good as well. 5% discipline, 10% artillery combat, really good for those military bonuses. And of course the trade policy that gives you 10% trade and production efficiency is just absurdly good for diplo points. So anyway, that was economic ideas. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it informational and entertaining. Of course, if you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave comments on your own thoughts and whether or not you think that this group is actually any good, or if I'm just kind of taking the wrong perspective on it maybe. And of course, I'll see you on the next one.